Okay. Boker Tov. Shalom to everyone in class. Shalom lekulam, everyone in Zoom. My name is Yafit Clymer. I speak English. I'm not an English speaker. So you're welcome to help me find the right words or the right pronunciation of things. Did you all watch the first class I sent? Yeah. Okay, so most of you, yes, it's on Zoom. You can get the recording, but I will go over some of the things. These are the sources that I've sent for last week, but I don't know if any of you. Same ones. It's the same ones. If you have one, so just want to go over some major ideas before we delve into. Yeah, there's more. Thanks, okay. Thank you. Okay. So that. Okay. So what are we going to do this year? And Hani reminded me. I mean, this was the first course I gave in Matan Ra'anana 20 years ago in the old building. I started with English and then Hebrew. For many years, I taught both Hebrew and English, and then I got tired. My tongue got tired speaking English. And now I'm also part of the Itgalia program, the Tanakh program of Wednesday. I don't know if you heard of it. So this shiur is really dear to me, also because we're going to learn Midrash. It is biblical figures in the eye of the Midrash, but more than we're going to learn Tanakh, we're going to learn Midrash, because it's the Midrashic way, how Chazal looked at the story of a specific person and understood it. And many times we think that a Midrash is interpretation of the Ketuv, of the text, but it's more talking about their values and the things that are happening in their own times. So what I brought you last week is I went over some quotes talking about the character of Midrash, and what you have in the boxes. Okay, it's one of the greatest scholars of Midrash, Aleph Halevi and Yosef Frankel, and they're both saying that when we delve into Midrash, now this is, I'll say something historical for a minute. When Chazal said the Midrash, they said the Midrash. They sat in front of Beit Midrash full of students. The time of the Midrash is almost 600 years of writing and saying and learning. It starts from the 1st century BCE till about 500 AC. Okay, so the time and the place and the surroundings and the happenings and the circumstances and what happened around them changed. So when we read the Midrash that was written in Eretz Israel, before the destruction of the Second Temple, it's not the same way as reading a Midrash from Eretz Israel at the 5th century, when the Roman Empire is already a Christian one. It's a completely different struggle and views that are going around the area. So that's why part of what we're going to do, in order to understand why a specific Chacham is saying something about a specific character figure in Tanakh, first we have to understand, where did he live? When did he live? What's the story of his life? Okay, and what is he trying to tell us? So what Halevi and Frankel are saying, that sometimes Midrash will come, and I'll just go over the sentences here. The people in Zoom, I'm looking back at the sources I've said. They're saying me where, I don't know. They're looking back at the sources I've sent last week. So the first interest of the Midrash, according to Halevi in his book Sha'arei Agadah, is the aesthetic one. In other words, there's the Chacham feels that something is missing in the story in order to make the story complete or whole. So they're add a midrash. In other words, it's not coming to explain something. There's nothing missing. I mean, something crucial and missing in the text. But if we add this, everything will be much nicer. Okay, so it's the aesthetic interest. The other interest is an exegetical interest. In other words, there's a word which is difficult, or a gap between the stories that we need to know what happened in between in order to understand the flow of the story. Or maybe there are two sentences or two words or ideas about a certain person or a certain story that contradict each other. We know that happens in Tanakh. So the darshan will come and will help us understand why really it's not a contradiction. Okay, they'll try to work that out. Good morning. הכל בסדר. Here, you can yeah. Thank you.
I kept up here.
מצוין, יופי. The third interest that we find in what Halevi is saying, I found this one the most fascinating one, because the third one of number 3 of what Halevi is saying is the educational or actual or relevant message that Chacham wants to say. Why is this the most fascinating one? Because really, when we want to, what we'll do, Bezrat Hashem, is we're going to go into the lab of Chazal. And in the lab of Chazal, there's not only the text, but there's also reality, and also what's happening around them to the people that they feel responsible for. And they feel responsible for either the Jews who live in Eretz Israel, or sometimes they live outside of Eretz Israel. And there's a difference sometimes between what happened to the Jews who live in south of Israel and the ones who live up north. There's a difference in life and reality when you live next to pagan Hellenistic neighbors, or you live next to Christian neighbors in Eretz Israel. So sometimes what the Chacham, what the Darshan is doing, he's taking advantage. He's writing on the figure in order to say something ki'ilu on what happened in Tanakh, but he really wants to talk to his generation, to give them educational message, theological message, spiritual message, sometimes it's even economic message, definitely moral, ethic messages. And Chazal, in order to make it sound better or nicer, or to lean on a holy text, they will say it. They will take the text of the Torah and they will say the midrash upon that text. Now, us as readers and learners, many times we'll ask ourselves, this sound so much far-fetched. How did they say this on something? Like, is it really true? The question that will follow our class is, we'll read something that Chacham is saying, someone saying about a sage saying about a certain person, and we'll say that doesn't make sense. That mainly doesn't make sense, but sometimes it's even contradicting pshat, and that's why the educational interest is so important, because Chazal were not afraid we will think that what they're saying is the truth. They trust us to understand that what they're saying is only using the text to give a message. Okay, we'll go to the Rambam, and the Rambam will say more clear things. What Frankel is saying is that there is some difficulty in the pasuk that the darshan, the sage, want us to understand. So sometimes it's to make the text clearer, but sometimes the Chacham has an idea or a message that he feels is very important to the people of his time. And the way that he is addressing it and giving it to his people, to the people around him, is through a biblical text. So he's saying a biblical text, and then he's taking a word from it that is not, no one would think that this word will lead to his new idea, but he's saying it through the word of the text to be connected to the text, but he's actually bringing something new to the world. We'll see examples. And the third thing, which we also see, is many times the Torah is very minimal in the words that the Torah is using to tell us a story. I'll give you an example, which we'll find further down on the way. Moshe Rabbeinu, he's born, he's older, and is by the Bat Paro, and then he grows up. How old is growing up? How long was he at Bat Paro's palace? Was it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years? But we find him, the Pasuk say that he grew up, and then he has to run away from Paro because he killed the Egyptian who wanted to kill the Jew. And he runs away to Midian, and he gets married with Tzipporah, the daughter of Yitro. And then God speaks to him at the sneh, and he goes back to Mitzrayim. We know how old he is when he goes back to Mitzrayim because the Torah says so. The Torah says he's 80 years old. Wait a second, he was born in his 80. Where did he spend those 80 years? Was he 20 when he left Mitzrayim and he stayed 60 years in Midian? Was he 40 when he left Mitzrayim and he stayed 40 years in Midian? And why don't we know what happened to him throughout those 10 years, tens of years? Like if he was 40 years with Yitro and Tzipporah in the desert, isn't it important to tell us what happened? And even if it's longer, isn't it important to know what happened to Moshe throughout these years? The Torah doesn't tell us anything. The Midrash will come and start to tell us beautiful stories about what happened to Moshe during that time. There's no clue whatsoever in the text for the Midrashim that Chazal are telling us of what happened to Moshe. So that's another question we'll have to ask. Why? Why are they feeling that they have a legitimacy to tell us something that is not in the text? Maybe if the Torah doesn't tell us, we're not supposed to know what happened to Moshe, because if it was important, the Torah will say it in the text. So why is Chazal taking the freedom to either tell a story or reveal something that was secretly passed from generation to generation till they decide it's time to tell it to everyone? So that's one hint. So just tell me the name, please. Joan.
Okay. Whenever I come across this, I say, oh, well, it's only Midrash. Is there something in the Gemara to corroborate this timeline?
So one of the things we'll see, we're going into the Rambam today, but one of the things, it's an excellent question, but you already made a difference between Midrash and Gemara. Sometimes the Midrash appears in the Gemara and they have the same ideas. So the big question isn't, the Geonim deals with that question. Okay, so before we go, because I want to go to the Rambam, but you're helping me, John, saying the step between Chazal and the Rambam. Okay, Chazal, again, I said 600 years. Midrashei Chazal from Eretz Israel are being, compiled by the 5th or 6th century. Rambam is 12th century. Between Gemara and Rambam, we have what we call Tkufat HaGeonim, and the period of the Geonim. Rav Seadia Gaon, Rav Amram Gaon, Rav Nehorai Gaon. And they are saying something very, very interesting about Midrash. We have a responsa that Jews ask the Geonim different, we have a few of them. Like, how should we view the Midrash, which is not in the Gemara? Okay. And the answer the Geonim are giving is fascinating, and it's surprising. And they say, Midrash is not something we need to take into account in our Avodat Hashem, and it's definitely has nothing to do with halacha. First of all, this, okay? So we're taking Midrash and like, it's interesting, it's nice. They say it's nice, it makes making people, feel that they, enjoy it. But this is all it is, just to have to spend time enjoying something that Chazal said. It's very harsh. In other words, like they don't think it's something deep or interesting or important for life. You want to be a Jew who Oved Hashem, you don't need to learn Midrash. That's what the Geonim are saying. how do they view the Gemara, the Midrashim in the Gemara? And then they say, listen, if the Midrash in the Gemara makes sense rationally, logically, so then you can take it into account in your life. Like if the message is important and it makes sense logically, it's something to value. But even if the Midrash in the Gemara, you find that it doesn't make sense logically, so it's not something you need to worry about. Okay? This is
Midrash and Agadah the same.
okay, so that's another good question. Usually Midrash and Agadah are the same in terms of the method and the literary genre that they're using, like parable, metaphor, story, etc. But when we say Midrash, we usually talk about the complement of Midrashei Rabbah. Okay, we have Bereshit Rabbah, Shmot Rabbah, Chamisha Chomshei Torah, and Chamesh Megilot. Other than that, we have Midrashim that we don't know if they were written earlier and was compiled and edited later, because we only find them much later at the 7th or 8th or 9th century. למשל מדרש תנחומא, למשל פרקי דרבי אליעזר, and some of them even later, like Yalkut Shimoni, which is an Ashkenazi edition at the 13th century of Midrashim. Some of them are parallel, some of them are not. So that's Midrash. Agadah, it's in the Gemara, and many times
In the Gemara?
it's usually we say, when we say Agadah, it's the Aggadic part of the Gemara. Okay, we take the Talmud and we separate it to the halachic discussion and discourse of the Talmud and the Aggadic part of the Talmud. Sometimes the Aggadic part in the Talmud is similar to a Midrash. Sometimes the Aggadic part of the Talmud we don't hear about it in the Midrash, but the Geonim, when the Geonim talk about Agadah in the Midrash, in the Agadah in the Talmud, they're much hesitant because it's in the Talmud. Okay, and the Talmud has a respectful place in tradition and in Torah Shebe'al Peh. That's why they say, okay, if it makes sense, you can accept it. You can think about it twice. If it doesn't make sense, well, you can skip it. Okay. Now, throughout the generation, what's your name? Roberta. So throughout the generation, we know some of the Chachamim that look through the Talmud, Ken Shisham, like all the 24 or something Masachtot of Talmud, and they say the Agadah doesn't really interest us, and they take only the halachic part and they make books to study in yeshiva just from the halachic discussion, putting the Agadah aside. Okay. I'll say something about today, okay? What happened at the last 150 years, that Jewish studies became academic, and scholars were starting to delve into Midrashim, and the world open in terms of opportunity, in terms of what we find. All of a sudden, we understand that Midrash makes sense, and there's a structure, and there are code words, and there's meanings. And somebody put a lot of effort, and we'll see that, put a lot of effort writing the Midrash. There's a reason the way that the Midrash opens and the way the Midrash ends. And in other words, scholars starting to unveil, the mask or the hasatum, and how black it was, that the understanding was so black. And Midrash today is viewed as one of the highest Jewish literature that is written, because it involves literature, it involves Tanakh, it involves history, it involves messages. I'm in love with Midrash, but the sages who wrote Midrash, really geniuses, like the way that they giving us the message in the most beautiful literary way. Okay, so that's today. When we come to
the saying about 1875, who was the sort of progenitor of that
First,
movement.
first of all, it was Chokhmat Israel, where the scholars, the Jewish scholars in Germany that were influenced by the Enlightenment movement.
Yeah.
Okay, Jews getting emancipation. Jews can go Jews can go to universities. Jews starts to learn a lot of other things, and the public, like the gentle public, are all learning history and starting to analyze literature, Milton, Shakespeare, and the Jewish scholars say, wait, we should do that to our own, books and writings. And they start to learn Tanakh in a different way, and Midrash in a different way, and Gemara in a different way. And then later on, we have Halivni and Lieberman and Geiger and many, and Heinemann, like most of them German Jews, who were part of the Chokhmat Israel, the organization of Chokhmat Israel, but they had many children, many disciples and students that continue that, and a lot of them are today in Eretz Israel, in Hebrew U, Ben Gurion University, Tel Aviv University, Bar Ilan University, continuing to learn, and also because there are two amazing gifts that God gave us at the 20th century, discoveries, archaeological discoveries that really made it possible for us to delve into our ancient text and understand them in a way that Rashi could not understand it because he didn't have what we have today. So the first one is the Cairo Geniza. Have you heard of the Genizat Kahir? Okay, the two nuns going to visit Egypt, and they're going to the great Jewish synagogue in Cairo, and they're going upstairs to the Aliyat Gag, to the attic, and they lean on one of the walls, and they feel that it's hollow. So they knock, and they hear that there's a room there. So they bring somebody from the street, and he breaks the walls, and they see that there are 10,000 and hundreds of thousands of papers, literally hundreds of thousands of papers. And then they understand it's a Jewish geniza. And they survived. And they call Schechter, who was one of the great Talmudic scholars of the time. And he comes from England with boxes, and he starts, piling papers in the boxes. And
Where are they today?
they are in different places. They are in the Sifriya Leumit in Jerusalem. They're in the Bodleian University in France. They're in Cambridge. They're in St. Petersburg in Russia. Some of them in the United States. They spread around. And the amazing thing is that we have not only prints from the 15th century and on, we have handwriting scripts from the 8th century. We have Jewish texts from the 8th century till the 20th century, till they found the Geniza, where Jews, they kept the books because if it had God's name, they didn't. But sometimes what we find is in every languages, we have Hebrew, we have Arabic, we have Greek, we have Aramaic, we have some Ladino, because most of the Ladino stayed with the communities and didn't make it to Mitzrayim, but those languages mostly, and we found ktubot, and we found contracts, because if you scribble a contract on one side and the other side was because page was very rare and expensive, so they use every piece of paper. So let's say there was a piece of a book, like a Torah book here, and there was an empty room, so they wrote the contract here. And when they finished with the contract, they put it in the Geniza because it had God's name in the other side.
What year was it?
I think it was something in the early 40s, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe I'm not sure exactly. Beseder, don't take me. Maybe it was 47 even. I forgot to check it, but it was early in the 20th century. Can
Where were they
because
from?
they're from England, because
They must have known.
no, they paid a lot of money, and for the Egyptians it was just papers. they didn't think of the value of the papers. It's not like, and now I'm moving to the next treasure we found in the 20th century, and that's the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, these were stolen because the Bedouins understood that the Jews are going to pay a lot of money for that, because they sensed it was ancient, but nobody thought that, you know, who cares about, you know, 10,000, hundreds of thousands of papers. Okay, that's
just thousands.
hundreds, and they did not finish going over all the papers that were found. They're still working on that. By the way, it's online. You can go into the Knizah Kahirit project and you can see some of the, one of the most interesting, fascinating, unbelievable foundings there is because the Rambam lived in Cairo and Mitzrayim for many years, and we have the handwriting of the Rambam.
Wow.
The handwriting of the Rambam, it's just unbelievable. When I was learning for my master's, we went to the Sifra Leumit, to the archive, and the person in charge told us about everything, and he showed us like it's not the real thing because they're afraid it's gonna get away. Yes. So and he said they gave the handwriting to
Apologies.
כן, איך אמרת את זה?
Graphology.
Graphologist, כן, הגרפולוג. And to learn a little bit about his character, but he refused to tell us the evidence. The only thing he was willing to tell us was that he was kind of a loner, which is not surprising. אז זה באמת מרתק. So in the Gnizah Kahirit, we had a glimpse, an amazing glimpse into Jewish life between the 8th century and on. But in the Dead Sea Scroll discoveries, we got to know what the cult in the Judea desert from the 1st century in Eretz Israel, how they lived, what they believed in, and also they had a huge library and we found text of all the books of the Tanakh, except for Megillat Esther, which is very interesting. The fullest book we have is in Museum Israel in the Book of the Shrine. That's the Megillah of Yeshayahu. In Hebrew, again, in Hebrew, and we found also the writings of their group. They're kind of a communal group. They ate together. They sat separately from the women. They left Yerushalayim because they decided that the sages in Yerushalayim are impuring the temple and the area, and they were very pious group. They washed their hands all the time, and they dunked in the mikveh all the time. But that was also an amazing glimpse into the past. This all from your question, Roberta. When we get to the Rambam, and the Rambam he has the text of the Midrashim, and he has the text of the Gemara, and he knows what the Geonim said before him. And Rambam being very rationalist, זה הדף. And the Rambam, keep that, okay, because we're going to go back to that one. And at the time of the Rambam starts his life in Spain at the 12th century. Then he leaves and he goes to North Africa. He lives in Morocco for a few years, and then he moves with his. We don't know anything about his wife. We know he had one son when he was 49, and his son's name was Avraham. He also became the leader of the Jewish community in Egypt after the Rambam passed away. And the Rambam understand in his time that either people take Midrashim seriously and they believe every word of the Midrash, or people mock the Midrashim to say, this is nonsense, how can, and he understand that he needs to make seder, like and he
Where did he live after Morocco?
Egypt, and he died at he came to visit Eretz Israel, and he is buried in Tiberias.
The people go to the street.
All the time, yes. All the time. Okay, so what I have, what we have here, I put the Hebrew and the English. I'm going to read the Hebrew. You can read along in the English, but you see that it's from Perush LaMishnah. The Rambam wrote the Perush LaMishnah when he was in his 20s. He wrote his first book, Sefer HaMitzvot, a list of all the mitzvot, when he was 21, and then he started working on Perush LaMishnah, and he started to write a Hayad HaChazaka, Mishneh Torah Lara, his halachic book of 14 parts, when he was 28 till he was 35. And Moreh Nevuchim, the God for the perplexed, he wrote when he wrote when he was 48, 49. He passed away when he was 67.
Who was his wife?
We don't know anything about his wife. We just know that he had a brother that he loved very, very dearly. He was a merchant who supported the Rambam after because when he lived in Egypt, when he lived in Spain, he was a doctor and he made a good living. When he fled to North Africa and Egypt, his brother supported him. He loved his brother. He always mentions his brother and his son. He has one son called he named him Avraham, because Avraham was the person Rambam loved the most. Like, he really adored Avraham, but we don't know anything about his wife. Okay, so in his Perush LaMishnah, Rambam understands that he needs to say something about Midrashim, and he's saying the following: "Umima she'ata tzarich ladat." This is what we need to know in terms of the words of the sages, and we have, may their memory be blessed, people are divided into 3 groups, okay? He says, I look around me and I understand there are 3 groups of people in the Jewish people that, the way that they understand the words of Chazal. The first group, and that's the majority of people, והוא רוב מה שראיתי, ושראיתי חיבוריו ומה ששמעתי עליהם, הם מאמינים אותם על פשטם, ואין סוברים בהם פירוש נסתר בשום פנים, והם רחוקים מן התבונות ואין בהם מן השלמות, ולא מצאו מעורר שיעורר אותם, סוברין שלא כיוונו החכמים ז"ל בכל דבריהם הישרים. אני אחזור על זה עד כאן. Says the Rambam, the first group, which is the majority of people, take the words of Chazal literally. And they believe everything they say, even if they don't understand how it can be. Okay? And unfortunately, says the Rambam, nobody till now, woke up to say, listen, you should understand something. It's not, they didn't mean that literally. Let us explain to you what Chazal meant when they said, X, Y, or Z. And the Rambam says that לפי דעתם, ויש הרבה ריחוק מן הסדר, and many of what Chazal are saying is so far away from logic, and that's why the common people take it literally, and that's how they teach the words of Chazal. Now, the second half of what Rambam is saying, and he was very aware because he had interactions with mostly Muslim intellectuals, but also some Christian intellectuals. And Rambam knew Greek, and he read Aristo, and he read Plato, and he read Aristotle, and he read the Arab philosophers who lived up till his time. Maybe I should say something about that. Islam, up till the 13th century, was the top of civilization in terms of what they brought to the world: philosophy, math, literature, poems, art. But art was very specific to the places they lived. Grammar and languages. They were the first linguistics who made it into a research area, into Mada, so to speak. And Rambam really respected them, and he had some. But when a new group of Islam warriors invaded Spain and became very violent, that's why Rambam left Spain. He understood that it's going to go to a very bad place. But we really should remember, many of them from Persia, a lot of philosophers and thinkers from Persia. Okay, so now the Rambam is saying, not only do these majority of Jews believe every word Chazal are saying, but people outside of our religion think that these people understand Chazal literally, and they laugh and they say, look at this religion. Look how it doesn't make sense. Look at these stupid people believing every word their sages said. Okay? And the Rambam is saying, this is very dangerous, and I have to teach those people the real truth about Midrashim, because they don't know the meaning, and they really are a problem to Am Yisrael, because people from outside looking at them, seeing that they believe everything, and they say, Judaism is not a serious religion. So that's the first group. The second group, says the Rambam, Hakat Shniya v'gam hem, there are also many of them, הם אותם שראו דברי חכמים ושמעו והבינו אותם כפי פשוטו, וחשבו שלא כיוונו החכמים בו זולתי מה שמורה עליו פשט הדבר, והם באים לסכל אותם ולגנותם ומוציאים דיבה על מה שאין בו דיבה. The next group, and that they're also the majority, and it gives us also a glimpse into the reality of on Jews in the time of the Rambam. Says the Rambam, there is a quite a big group that also believe that what Chazal said is what Chazal meant, and therefore they think that Chazal are not smart enough. In other words, there is a group of Jews that tell themselves, this is what our sages say. That means I don't have to take my sages seriously. Not if what they say in Midrash are so silly and stupid and it doesn't make sense. Maybe everything they say doesn't make sense also in the halachic way, in the way that they're teaching us Torah. So the first group are sort of very innocent, common, simple people who are not complex enough to understand the meaning of the text, and they really believe it literally. They think highly of Chazal. That's why they take everything they say literally, but they're making damage in what people think of Judaism. The second group is a dangerous group, because these are Jews who think, if this is what Chazal are telling me, there's no way I'm going to take Chazal seriously. And they're taking the Midrashim and they're making Chazal very shallow and simple and irrational. The third group, says the Rambam, Ve'akat shlishit vehem chayashem me'atim ad me'od. And this is, this I wanna stand on the third cut, because it's very interesting. And the Rambam will say, and the third is, as God lives, he swear in the name of God, very small, to the point that it's not fitting to call them a group, except in the same way as one says about the sun that it is a species. How many suns did the Rambam know there is in the world in his time? How many suns are there?
Well, probably millions.
But what does he know?
Right,
One. So he says the third group, there's so many, they're not even a group. It's like if you call the sun a group. So it's one. So who's that one that understands everything and will explain everything to the rest of the people? Himself. Okay. Now, here I always get questions in terms of, was he an arrogant person? So in my humble opinion, okay, I cannot read in his handwriting what kind of a person he was, his personality, but to my humble opinion, it's not from arrogance. The Rambam was a man of truth to his bones. In other words, He's not saying anything that he doesn't think it's the truth. And he feels it's his religious obligation to tell the truth, even if it will sound to other people like he is overlooking them. Okay, and there are many many parts of Rambam that he's saying, these people are stupid, or if you say that, it means that you don't understand what it is to be Aved Hashem. I won't say he is arrogant, but I will say that he has a very elitistic, elite point of view of what it is to be a real Jew. Okay, to be a real Jew, you have to be excellent in Torah and excellent in philosophy and the studies of logic and all the science that are available in the time. And only if you combine the two will you be a true Oved Hashem. Why? Because God gave us a sechel. Rambam seeing Tzelem Elokim, Tzelem Elokim that we were created with. There are different ways of understanding it. Some say the mystical way, the Kabbalistic way of seeing Tzelem Elokim is something about the face. Like there's some shadow of God's face, of God in people's face. Some say it's the freedom of choice. That's the Tzelem Elokim. Some say, of course, the neshama, that godly part that we have. Rambam started the path of saying that Tzelem Elokim is the mind, which is really the first one to say it was someone who lived way before the Rambam. It's Philo, Philon Alexandroni, Philo from Alexandria, who was really the true first Jewish philosopher, unless we count Kohelet as a philosopher. I can't say that word. How do you know? Yeah, Kohelet באנגלית. Ecclesiastic. Okay. But Philo, who is a Jew who lives in Alexandria in Egypt, who in a very Hellenistic society, and he knows Greek, and he's the first one to write amazing writings that to protect the Jewish religion. He lived in the 1st century, very, I mean, he's very ancient in terms of the Rambam, compared to the Rambam, I mean. And Philo is telling all of his Greek friends and Greek philosophers, you're looking for a real a philosophical religion. My religion is the real philosophical religion. And he proves it in many different ways. By the way, we know that for about 100 years, it's a real enigma in Jewish history. For about 100 years, something between the year 30 BCE to 120 BCE, around those times, we find many Greek converts in Eretz Israel and in areas that Jews lived in the Roman Empire. I specifically say Greek because the Romans were a little bit different. But Greek people in the Hellenistic world who really had philosophical tendencies, when they looked at Yahadut and they looked at, let's say, Greek mythology, they said, Judaism is a clean philosophical religion. And they really were impressed by many ideas, the one God that is not, you can't see, the idea of Shabbat, and many other things. Okay, so that was Philo. He also influenced people.
Was Philo contemporary of Plato and Aristotle?
No, so Plato is the 4th. נתחיל מסוקרטס, okay? Because Plato is the Socrates is the 5th century BCE, and I think Aristotle is already the 3rd century, but or 4 and 3rd, the 3 of them. Okay, but Plato and Philo knows all of their writings because he can read Greek. So the Rambam comes and say, he takes that midrashic thing seriously, and he feels a need to protect Yahadut and protect the truth in terms of midrashim I'm talking about.
What traditions were written by the time that Clymer lived?
No, not, I'm going back to the Rambam. כן, כן, כן. אני חוזרת לרמב"ם.
So you say he's taking midrashim to find the truth?
Who?
Rabbi.
So עכשיו הוא יסביר. Now the third group. The third group, there are the minority, maybe even one person in that group. They know the truth. And what is the truth? And the truth is, says the Rambam, that this group understand that when Chachamim are saying something, they mean to give us a message. And the job, the task of the learner is to reveal the message. And then he gives another rule, and he says, so first of all, he says, if we believe that things that they say that contradict the mind, contradict logic is true, so either we are stupid, excuse me, or we're making Chazal stupid. What they really meant is just to give us a message, and we need to understand what the code words that they're using and what is the message that they're using. And then he gives a rule, which I think, I mean, for me, is very helpful, because the Rambam says, if you have a midrash, and we'll ask that question when we learn the midrashim, if you have a midrash that logically makes sense, it could have happened. It could have happened, and it was passed on from generation to generation, b'Torah shebe'al peh, till Chachamim decide it's time to, reveal it to everyone. But if you read a midrash that doesn't make sense logically or realistically, or it contradicts a fact that we know of the world, you are obligated not to believe in this midrash, but you are obligated to try to understand what's the message, because Chachamim are trying to give us a message. And what I said about the last 200 years or 150 years, really, it's only then that people took that seriously and say, okay, let's try to understand what the Midrash is trying to do. It's not that there were not Chachamim throughout the generation who tried to do that. Maharsha tried to do that. The biggest writings, work of interpreting Midrash is of the Maharal Prague at the 16th century. And he follows the words of the Rambam, which is very interesting because the Maharal was also a Kabbalistic persona. So, but he's taking what the Rambam is saying, he's saying, I will try to explain the Midrashim. And he takes many Midrashim. Some of his explanations, hard to understand, but he is really trying to follow the method that the Rambam gave. And he's saying, okay, I have a Midrash. It doesn't make sense. What do I think the message is? And he's trying to find the message. I'll give you one example, which is simple and very nice example. And it's the Midrash that says that the donkey that Abraham rode to the Akedah is the female donkey. I don't know how to say in English, female donkey. Female donkey, there's no word. The female donkey that Bil'am rode in, to go curse Am Israel. And that will be the donkey that the Mashiach will ride on when he comes. Okay. So, okay.
They say that donkey.
Right. So, bואו נעשה according to the three groups. So the first group will say, if the Chachamim said it, it's true. There's some kind of a stable somewhere that is, this donkey is still there, changing its sex, then moving again to being a donkey. And that's why people mock them, because some say, if this is what Chazal believes in, that means I cannot trust Chazal. They're not serious, smart people. The third group will try to understand what it means. And what the Maharal says about that Midrash, he says, the donkey of Avraham is the donkey of Avraham, and he died, in that area. And the Aton and the Chamor of Mashiach, there are three different donkeys, Barur. But the message is that Chamor in Hebrew sounds like Chomer, material, Gashmi, physical, okay. So Maharal is saying Avraham was able to get over the physical and connect to the spiritual because he heard the word of God, Lech Lecha. Bil'am, his donkey was smarter than him because the donkey saw the angel and Bil'am didn't see the angel. And that's why they call her Aton, because he wasn't able to get over the physical and the material. And Mashiach will come on a donkey because the Mashiach will teach everyone how to get over the materialistic part of life and stick to the spiritual part of life. Okay, that's the explanation of we can like it or not, but that's an attempt to take a midrash and to try to understand the message of the midrash. And what we are going to do in class, and I'm sorry the introduction is so long because I think it's crucial from experience. When I was starting to give this class, just going straight into the midrashim, there's so many questions that popped, so I revised it, and that's why I'm starting with a very long introduction. Okay.
Sorry, but what's the difference between the role of midrash and Kabbalah? Because I think that there is a lot of interfaces. I always see it as the midrash is the popular version of very esoteric mystical tradition that were not accessible to the public, and writing it was actually to secure its
existence.
In the same way they wrote the Mishnah in terms of the discussion. It's like taking an oral tradition, couching it into something that is accessible. So I feel that the Midrash has always had this connection. It's like putting into writing an esoteric tradition, a Kabbalistic tradition. So, and that's why it can appear weird, it can appear because it speaks of concepts rather than on matter.
Okay, so thank you. Your name?
Bettina.
Medina? Bettina. So thank you for that question. I'll try to make it clear the difference between Midrash and Kabbalah and Zohar, okay, and mystical writing. We don't consider the Midrash as esoteric literature. Okay, the Midrash is a major literature of Chazal, which because it appears in the Gemara many times, we understand that people of the time in each generation knew of the ideas of the Midrash, and it was a way of Chazal to portray ideas and messages, etc., etc. There are some midrashim that contain mystical hints, like the four who entered the Pardes. Okay, but so that's the midrash. We know of esoteric ideas in the Jewish society and people already in the Sfarim HaChitzoniyim. Okay, let me say something about the Sfarim HaChitzoniyim. Part of what we found in Megillot Midbar Yehuda in the Judea desert, in the Qumran writings, are books, are Jewish literature from the time of the Second Temple, who did not make it into Tanakh, and Chazal in the formal, in the consensus area of Chazal, never mentioned them, maybe once, but we have those books. It means Jews wrote literature during the second Beit HaMikdash. It's mostly from the 3rd century BCE till the destruction of the temple at the year 70. And we found book like Chanoch, Jubilee, Shoshana, the Tzavaot HaShvatim, the wills of the Shvatim, a book on Shlomo, a book on Ezra, Maccabim, and Chashmon, like the book of Maccabee, etc., etc. Now, what happened throughout the years is that Christian church, the Catholic Church, adopted, because these writings were spread around the Jewish world. Chazal did not see them as holy. They saw them as novels or public story, except for Chashmonai, which is an historical story. But Chazal did not view them as holy. The New Testimony adopted all the books that were found, except for Chashmonaim, because it's a historical story, and they put it into the compilement of the New Testament. So you can find all these books in the New Testament. It's Jewish writings from the Second Temple time, okay? That the Catholic Church adopted as holy books. Now, what do we find in these books that maybe Chazal were uncomfortable with? We have stories about angels, and we have mystical ideas, and we have people talking to angels. This and the book of Yehudit, for example, and many others. When we come to writings of Chazal, of mystical ideas, the first, except for the stories in the Gemara al Arba'a shenichnesu lapardes, we have what we call Sifrut HaHechalot. Sifrut HaHechalot, the literature of the palaces, is a few books from the 5th century using the names of Chachamim of Eretz Israel from the time of the Mishnah and Amoraim. It's Chachamim of Eretz Israel from the 1st century to the 4th century. And the stories are that they go up to heaven and they have discussions with angels, and some of them also describe where God dwells. And it's very, very, very Kabbalistic and mystical. And that's the first compile books that we have in terms of, but they always stayed as esoteric literature. And the midrashim were spread the minute they were written. They were spread around the Jewish world. The minute they were printed, there were even more. But all the Kabbalistic writings were always kept we call it Chachmei Chen. Chen, Rashi Tevot, Chochmat HaNistar, the wisdom of the Nistar, the unknown, the hidden. The next book we have is Sefer HaBahir from the 8th century. And that's the first time we hear about the 10 Sfirot. And the next step is the students of Ramban in Spain at the 12th century. And Ramban is making a very hard effort to keep the secrets. If you know the Perush of Ramban and the Torah, many times he will say, and this is the truth, and you should understand it if you will understand it. And he's just giving hints that there is an entire other way, secret way to understand, but he's not going to tell. Something happened, and that's a whole course to explain that. So I'm just going to give you the short version. Something happened at the middle of the 13th century, and group of Jews start to learn hand scripts of secret texts that were hidden up till then. We don't know, but we do know that it happens in Spain. And at the end of the 13th century, there is a text that is called the Zohar. Okay. Now, in the Zohar, for many years, scholars thought, Gershon Sholem, for example, thought that the Zohar is one book that was written by Rabbi Moshe de Leon, who had many of these hand scripts, and he thought he wrote everything. Today, we know that it's not true, mostly because of two students of Gershon Sholem. One is Professor Yehuda Libes, and the other one is Professor Moshe Idev. And they prove that the Zohar is not one piece, but it's many different pieces, many different little books, and they were written in different times. And some of them are based on earlier Jewish literature, some from the 12th century, some from the 8th century, some from the 5th century, okay? And therefore, to say that the Zohar was written in the 13th century by Rabbi Moshe de Leon, it's no longer truth. It is true that at that time, all of a sudden, this book appears in the Jewish world. And where was part of it hidden? So we don't know the many, many myths around that. And from being an esoteric literature, it became very popular, influencing Jews both in Ashkenaz and in Sfarad. At the 16th century, where Ha'ari is writing his view of the Zohar and taking it to a different way, it becomes even more popular and spread around the Jewish world. I do want to say, though, Benita, that I mean, I've learned, I took courses in Ben Gurion University on Zohar, because I love Midrash so much. I always felt that it's also like there are many parts of the Zohar that mamash midrashim. Many others are very weird, very strange, very mystical. Some of the Zohar's writing are also very erotic, and but some of the Zohar parts are mamash midrashim, like the way that Jews and were trying to understand what happened in the text.
I tell you what, you wrote here, and what Rambam said, you reported here, believe them in the first groups, and they believe them according to the simple meaning, and there's not reason that they have any sort of esoteric meaning. And I think that this is really what Rambam understood as well, that they contain some kind of secrets, esoteric secrets, and it's not only their educational, they're not only touched in a particular historic circumstance. But also have underpinnings that are more esoteric.
But knowing, right, but knowing the Rambam, the English use the word esoteric, but knowing the Rambam first of all doesn't know Zohar. It wasn't in his in lifetime. The Zohar wasn't there yet. Only 100 years later. And we do know that everything that Chachamim are trying to say, which is esoteric and mystical, because he's so much of a mind person and a logic person. When he says esoteric, I think when the English uses esoteric here on the Hebrew that he's using, they mean to say there's a message here that Pirush Nistar, meaning that and it's not Nistar that we cannot know it. It's Nistar that we Nachon, but a Nistar for the Rambam is not a secret that you cannot understand. It was hidden. Chazal used it as hidden, and now it's time to reveal and to try to understand it. Okay, it's a big question in the study of Rambam. We don't know what he thought of Sifrut HaEchalot, because the little that we know of him, he rejects everything that sounds a little bit like an idea of a human being, walking around in heaven and talking to angels. Mamash lo yachol lekabel et ze mitzad hasechel. Okay, so I think when he says hidden, maybe Chazal had a reason to hide it, but we can understand it. Like we can prove, according to the Rambam, the existence of God. Okay, not everybody will be able to understand it, says the Rambam, but if you use your mind, you will be able to understand. Okay. So next week, we're going to start with our first figure, Hanoch, character, and that's Henoch in English. So keep the sources.
Yeah, but you only translate the book in English now?
I don't think they make that. He has a very basic book on Agadah and Midrash. Does he have it in English? I don't know.
What's it called?
That's what it's called. That's the name.
He was my neighbor,
Bemet?
and I didn't know that he was.
Wow.
I was so embarrassed.
I didn't hear who he was.
What?
Who was your neighbor?
Yoga Frank, and when we went to dinner over Shabbat with him, and I'm so embarrassed now that I know that, like, who he is. We talked about like body problems, which was not.
Wow.
It is so, now I look back on like this precious dinners and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did you pass away?
Actually a while ago, but his daughter,
Yeah.
she didn't live with him, but like she was also, I think she's also brilliant. And, you know, her name Rachel or youngest daughter. Was an academic, I mean, whatever. The point is that I had no clue in the world until years later.
Wow.
I saw his name now. Okay,
Amazing. להתראות. שלום למי שבזום.
Must be treated.